All right, greetings and welcome to everybody. My name is Adam Fletcher, and I am the CEO of an international nonprofit organization called Youth and Educators Succeeding. For more than 25 years, Youth and Educators Succeeding has been working in K-12 schools across the United States and around the world to promote powerful opportunities for young people to make a difference. It's an exciting organization with a lot going on constantly and super fun. And it's really exciting to host this conversation today. Joining me is Wendy Lesko, and we're going to do introductions in just a moment. But before we get going, I want to take a few quick notes. A few quick housekeeping notes. One is that as advertised, this conversation is an introduction to the power of Youth Infusion. We probably won't touch on a lot of topics that we cover in our 3-hour workshop or in other formats. This is a taster, so you're going to get a sense of what we're talking about, but not super in depth. So I want to suggest, challenge, and otherwise put out for you that you drop your questions, comments, concerns, and ideas into the chat. And if those aren't satisfied in the course of the conversation, you're more than welcome to reach out to us afterwards, and I'll share that at the end of our 45-minute presentation, which is going to go by too fast, I'm sure of it. Like I said, I'll be sharing a recording of this webinar to all of the folks who registered, and I'll put it out on the social media as well. So that you'll be able to see it through there. And I hope that you take a chance to share this and otherwise help us spread the word about Youth Infusion. Wendy and I are longtime collaborators and comrades, and we're going to banter. We're going to discuss things as we go along. It's a super fun conversation that we have. And it's really, really cool to be able to share this space with her. So just so you know, this is less of a presentation and more like a conversation. We are also, just so you know, in the course of this 45 minutes, it's going to go by too fast, we're going to make some generalizations that we don't have time to really explain. We want to spark your imagination and help you think new, bigger, and broader about what you do, whether that is youth development, or maybe you're a classroom teacher, whether you're an executive director of a nonprofit or a strong, powerful activist and advocate in your own community or working nationally or internationally. We want to spark your imagination. We're eager to continue this conversation, though. So after this, please send all your questions, comments, ideas, concerns, considerations, reactions, anything through youthinfusion.org. And we'll talk about that as we go along. I want to introduce my friend, Wendy Lesko. Like I said, Wendy and I have been collaborating and really she's a thought partner. She is a gigantic, Wendy doesn't like the title, but she is a thought leader. She wrote the book Youth, the 26% Solution a ways back and was advocating for these roles long before anybody else was across the country. She was a co-author of that book and other books, and she's given hundreds of presentations, including a TED Talk, that was a TEDx talk called Youth Voice plus Youth Vote. Her first job was as a community organizer with Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers Union. And then she was a reporter covering the US Congress. That contributes to her super deep commitment that all people, especially those furthest from power, have the opportunity to participate fully throughout our democracy. She's the co-founder of the Youth Activism Project and a lot of intergenerational campaigns that led to the passage of local ordinances in 20 or more different public policies. She also received an award in 2019 from Youth Move, National Professional of the Year Rockstar Award. So that's some credentials. And Wendy is one of my funnest people in the whole wide world. I mean, she's just an awesome human, and I'm excited to have her here with me today.
And Wendy. Back to you, Adam. It's great to be here. And the fact that we have managed to stay together and connected from one Washington to the other Washington, D.C. to Olympia has been wonderful. And we've seen such growth and evolution in this whole sector of youth engagement, all kinds of words, which we won't go into. But just a bit of background about Adam, who I really got to know when he launched Free Child Institute. in 2001, and then built on that, soundout.org. And both of his websites, I really recommend. They are basically Wikipedias for the range of areas and roles that young people can play at the local, state, or federal level. It's remarkable. And it's, this is somebody who has written more books than I can count, including the Student Voice Revolution. And this is someone who was the first in his family to go to college, to graduate from college after growing up in a really tough neighborhood and really having a lot of problems. And Adam, I think you've told me many times how you really credit great adults in your life for getting you through the PTSD that you have suffered. And now, of course, in addition to wearing all these different hats and traveling and giving a speech one day in, the UK on Zoom and another with the CDC, he's all over the place, but his real hat right now is with Yes. And so I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. Wendy, just so you know, we have a request that your camera gets turned on if you get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Wendy and I have fun with our technology and play with it all the time just to see if we can do it. You all know how that works these days. All right, so check this out. Youth Infusion. First thing, before we get going, big ups and props to everybody who's giving shout outs in the chat. If you haven't introduced yourself in there, I invite you to drop your name, put in your title, give people a sense of where you're at and what you're doing. And again, a special greeting to all of our international folks calling from the other side of the planet at the other time of day. And welcome to all the people from across the country. Especially big welcome to all of our friends from Gen Yes, all of our friends from Free Child Institute, all of our friends from soundout.org, and all of the places where Wendy and I roam in all of our coolness and fun times. Let's jump into here and see what we start to splice off. I want to introduce this definition of Youth Infusion. For those of you who have never heard of it before, Youth Infusion is a brand new way of looking at young people throughout our society. We're talking about the youngest young people to the oldest young people and everybody in between. Nobody's excluded. Youth Infusion fosters intergenerational partnerships with every young person in every community throughout every opportunity in order to make the world a better place. Take a bite on that. Youth Infusion fosters intergenerational partners with every young person in every community throughout every opportunity in order to make the world a better place. And you all know what that means to me. I'm a dad. I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and this is the heart of the relationship that I have with my kid. On the real, I'm also a longtime youth worker. I spent 10 years doing direct line level youth work with young people, and this was the goal that I always aspired to. If you've been in a workshop or a training, or maybe I've consulted your organization in the past, or maybe you're a member of one of our programs now, Youth Infusion is at the heart of what we're doing from now on. So check this out one more time, right there on your screen. Youth Infusion fosters intergenerational partnerships with every young person, every community, throughout every opportunity to make the world a better place. This is so important at this moment in time. It's always been vital. And I am passionate and deliberate about saying that. But it's so important at this moment in time because Youth Infusion is at the heart of anti-white supremacy and age segregation for K-12 schools, community groups, nonprofit organizations, government programs, and anybody who's trying to affect not just the lives of young people, but the reality of all of our communities, all of our institutions, because the lives of young people affect everywhere all of the time. We have to change the way that we're interacting with them if we're going to defeat white supremacy and if we're going to end age segregation with young people. And Youth Infusion is how we jump into the heart of it. Oh, 2 decades ago, this time is passing on us, isn't it? 2 decades ago, a man that I honor and recognize for his contributions to the field. He's a sociologist who spent a long time in the field and a long time doing powerful research. His name is Mike Males. He wrote some spectacular books, including The Scapegoat Generation. And he wrote that today's ephobiphobia is the latest installment of a history of bogus moral panics targeting unpopular subgroups to obscure and unsettling reality. Our worst social crisis is middle Americans' own misdirected fear. Boom. We're here to end
Boom.
this
That is a powerful time bomb. And before I give you basically 2 minutes on the history for the last few decades on youth empowerment, I have to tell you that I think Adam is actually controlling me, because I think you have to give me camera privileges. And so he's being a very adultist in this, even though I am his senior. So I'm going to keep going because we are pushing the clock here. And you can see me in future workshops. Believe me, you are not missing anything by not seeing me in person. So just hear my radio broadcaster voice, and hopefully that will work. So quick history. These are gross generalizations and oversimplifications, but we want to get to the next tier of youth involvement, and that is in the 1990s, definitely what Mike Males is talking about. It was that time of being super predators. That was a normal term for young people. And it was, at best, we're going to fix them. They are objects. They are all at risk. And this deficit fear-based mentality has luckily been put aside for the most part. It still lingers, which we will not talk about today, but it's still there, like a lot of white supremacy, et cetera. But then we moved into the much more positive youth development. And this is very much youth are the leaders of tomorrow. By and large, positive youth development, again, a real generalization. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I want to create some really broad strokes here. Positive youth development primarily is about adult-controlled, supervised activities. Even most student governments have a pretty heavy arm on the student advisor, who sometimes will move them in another direction. There are plenty of outliers to this. We have a lot of school clubs, again, very much youth-led, but again, the adult advisor very much plays a role. And we're going to talk about the good and bad in all of this. It's not clear black and white, but where we are moving to, which is another really good development, is what I like to frame ad hoc advisory groups engagement. And these roles are, for example, Adam, if you can show a couple of the slides so that's our super predator. This is a very jazzy student government or youth club. And then here we have a member of Congress who is creating a youth advisory council. And this is very unusual for members of Congress, but very common, actually. Many cities have youth advisory boards to talk to them and talk about everything from curfews to young people who are homeless. And this is, again, moving forward in terms of that space of giving young people a bit more room in the car. And that is the metaphor I want you to imagine. So imagine a car. In the deficit fear-based, where do you think the people are? Where are young people? In the hubcaps? I'd say in the trunk, okay? In our positive youth development, they are in the back seat usually. They are, they're talking, they're laughing, they're suggesting all kinds of ideas, they're making ideas about what route we should take. And that's a very robust car that's driving. Then we have the ad hoc advisory role. Those are young people who are much more in the passenger seat and have a little more proximity to the driver. But in none of these cases are young people touching the wheel. And that is where Youth Infusion comes of engaging so that young people are sharing the wheel. Now, as we all know from Dreamers for March for Our Lives, we have, okay, I think I may have just gotten a message. Yes, hello everyone again. So we're in the car, and now I've lost my train of thought. I have just been derailed to my hubcap is off. So what we're finding is in Generation Z, this is, as we know, an incredibly active, diverse generation of 40 million people. And some of these young people, because of March for Our Lives, Dreamers, and also we go back in time, right, on all historical movements, we have so needed young people who are unapologetic, who are bold, who push adults to lead those movements. They have their hands on the wheel, and we as adults do not. But what Adam and I are working on, we want your input, we want your reactions. It's again a new way. It's not deficit, it's not positive, it's not ad hoc advisory. It is youth infusion. We work together. We take down that wall that moves adults and youth, working, but in a much more collaborative and equal way. And we will share with you when we send out the recording a statement which I think does capture those young people who are not necessarily involved in only autonomous youth-led movements, but those who actually want to work with us. What a concept, right?
Hey, Wendy, I'm going to jump in here really quick.
No,
Check
please.
this out. So one of our participants, Amy Bloom, asked a great question of how you break down those walls. And so what I'm going to suggest to everybody right now, take your ideas, because I know the knowledge is in the room. We've talked about that a lot. Take your ideas. How do we break down these age walls and drop them into the chat? Give us some ideas so that we can see these roll in. Wendy will keep rolling, and maybe I'll drop a few in as we keep going. Sound good?
Thank you. That's great. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how this generation, they see democracy not as a spectator sport, even if they're not of voting age. They demand diversity, equity, and inclusion. They see policy as a word that is a normal word to use when they're demanding systemic change. And so for those young people, those movers and shakers who don't want to wait until they're an adult, and of course we know once they become adults, what happens? So often those ideas are lost. And that is the benefit of having youth infusion. So what I want to leave you with briefly is a wonderful way to collapse this whole idea of intergenerational collaboration. And it's by 11th grader Preya Preddy with the Kentucky Student Voice Team. She's also one of the leaders of the national campaign called Youth in Government to make sure young people are infused in all the federal government offices and agencies. And here's just a clip of what she said at a recent press conference. She said, what we're talking about is students working side by side with adults to identify and to address issues, empowering other underserved students in the process, prioritizing equity and justice. We're co-designing and co-creating. These are intergenerational partnerships are at the core of our work. This is an incredibly complex process. As adults, we're the ones who have to change more. And now I'm going to throw it back to Adam, who can begin to unravel and unpack some of what we need to have happen.
You know, one of the things that you make me think about, Wendy, and so many of us have had different versions of this conversation, and some of us are brand new to it. And one of the things that I try to understand myself is literally, what can I do at this point? I think a lot of people like to talk about the 50-50 split, you know, like all we have to do is treat youth as equals. But one of the things that I keep finding in this work, no matter what we're doing, whether it's in the classroom or in a nonprofit boardroom or in, you know, community organizing efforts, is that instead of equality, where things are split equal between youth and adults, It needs to be about equity. And one of the things that is pouring into our chat are people saying things that are about equity, not necessarily treating people as 50-50, but understanding there are times when young people know more than adults, and we need to put them in that driver's seat so that they can show us where to go. However, there are also times when adults know where we're going and we get to drive. And then there are times where we can share the steering wheel. And it's that ability to meter that out on a given occasion. Is it about equity? And when it is, what difference does it make? This is especially important when we're trying to engage low-income youth and youth of color, African American youth, American Indian youth, no matter what. When we're trying to bring forward BIPOC, we have to realize that it's not about equality, because we're not all starting from the same place. And it's not about equality because we might not go the same place or want to go the same place. But along the road, we can work together in this kind of partnership. So right here on the screen right now, I have some different elements in these, in this Youth Infusion and what it looks like. Youth Infusion is conscious. It's not coincidental. It is equitable. It's not equal. It's about humility, appropriate transparency, and consistent flexibility. Now, for the rest of us who are taking a look in that chat, scroll up and look at some of the powerful, powerful lessons. Some of my favorite people are on this Zoom right now. So just big shout out to all of you. You know who you are. I'm just in awe of some of the conversation that's already happening in this chat, Wendy. It's so cool. George Pegalo down in California. George says, have youth at the table when decisions are made and make sure they're meaningfully involved. Thank you, George. That's exactly it.
Right.
Anne made the point that the messiness is so worth it. And also talked about learning about the passions of young people and really tapping into that passion. And the conversation goes on above that as well. I mean, we have some really great insight from a lot of different folks. Brad Lewis in DC and in Maryland said, try partnering with senior corps programs. Melissa Masoner in Kansas says, learn and practice old and new ways of listening, really listening. And, you know, just so much insight here and just much. So make sure that you're putting your ideas and thoughts into the chat. And yeah,
I'd love just to pick up on the word messy. I think we don't do justice to that word, right? If we're artists and we have a palette, the paints are messy. Any creative, innovative process, unless there is a clear business plan, which means there's very little that is going to surprise us, the more we can be open and excited about the unknown. And young people, to me, you know, as being really an ancient dinosaur with a grandson at this juncture, they see the world in a way we can't possibly see or imagine. And that's why I feel like it is such a tremendous loss if we aren't capturing that for the benefit of our own lifelong learning, that we continue to reimagine, but we need their help because they again have a different pair of eyes and
you know,
different
Wendy,
perspectives and different experiences.
Exactly. And right here in our conversation right now, there are a couple of students who are with our programs through Youth and Educators Succeeding. And so big props to the students who have joined us today. I hope that you're hearing things that are attaching to your brain and really helping us understand more of your perspective. Feel free to drop that in the chat as well. So big shout out. But, you know, I really want to call out Mike Males again. Check this quote out. The general strengths of old and young are not oppositional, but symbiotic. Today's rapidly changing and diversifying societies, the recency and flexibility of youth provide a leadership edge. So Youth Infusion isn't about giving up power, it's about expanding power. And you all know that I love my analogies, and I love that analogy of the candle. When you take another candle and light it from a candle that already exists, you don't take away the flame, you make more. Power isn't about giving it up, it's about spreading it out. And Youth Infusion is about spreading out power and opportunity and reality. And this is why it's so important to our society that we make this pivot. Now, one of my jams, Wendy, we've talked about this, but just for the sake of kind of framing it out for the folks who are listening in, is that I love to look at these systems and really begin to understand where can we make sense of this conversation. So for the sake of illustrating that a little bit, here's a graphic. It's not a perfect graphic, but you know what model is perfect at the end of the day? One of the things my friend Greg Williamson says is start anywhere, go everywhere. And right here, here's an opportunity to go everywhere. Inside of the yellow lines, you can see some of the ways that we can begin with Youth Infusion. We can look at the people who are involved, young people, older people. It doesn't matter what their age is, their identities, their belonging. People, look at the people, start with the people. Look at the procedures. How do we do the things that we do on purpose? Look at the practices, which are the ways that we do them kind of accidentally or coincidentally or just by motion rather than deliberation. Look at the policies, you know, those formal rules and regulations and structures that really inhibit, prohibit, or otherwise keep young people from actually being infused in organizations. Look at the products, meaning the things that we create, the outcomes. Look at those products for whether or not they hold youth infusion. Look at the places where it happens, the literal spaces and places. Right now, so many of us are in our homes. When have we ever talked about youth infusion in families, let alone youth voice or youth involvement or youth engagement or any of the old ways that we used to talk about it? Today, we talk about youth infusion in families and what that looks like, or the internet. So many of our young people are spending so much of their day on the internet, not as some kind of slam, but it's the reality of where we're at, just like we do with our work. When have we talked about youth infusion on the internet? It's a great place to have the conversation. So look at the places, look at the personnel. These are the people who are hired to do this job. When we begin to look at that, we have to also look at the possibilities. Youth infusion isn't some prescription. It's not some silver bullet where it's like, here are the 10 things that you have to do to get it done. Instead, it's an iterative process. This is about transformation. And so rather than being very concrete and sequential, A to Z, this is the way you do it, linear thinking, this is about dynamicism. It's about responsiveness, and it's about relevance to the particular moment that we're in. So that's kind of a layout of those P's, but what does it really look like? That's what all the white boxes are for in this model. All of these are different forms of systems, informal systems and formal systems where youth infusion can happen. You notice that I put entertainment on there. I put gaming on there. Mm-hmm. But some of the most powerful examples that we know about in Youth and Educators Succeeding are examples of young people who are creating entertainment and they're gaming 24/7. Whether or not we like it is irrelevant. It's where it happens. It's where young people are. So let's infuse them into that. Recreation, technology, schools. You know, one of the most powerful programs that we have inside of Youth and Educators Succeeding is called Gen Yes. And in Gen Yes, students learn how they can help teachers use technology more effective in classrooms. It's a super powerful piece. One of our student tech leaders just dropped a description of Gen Yes in the chat, so take a look at that. Economics, culture, tech, business, identities, public health, government, all of these are systems. Even our identities are systems of sorts. Healthcare, sports, nonprofit, religion, mental health, our friends, our systems, especially in the times of the pandemic. How is that system doing? And where do we infuse youth into it? Our families, our education systems. So many opportunities for youth infusion, Wendy. It's mind-boggling. But it's like, where could we go and what does it mean?
Right. Well, one of the things that I've started, because this is a new project that Adam and I have really just begun in the last month or two, is I am really profiling organizations that are experimenting because, as Adam said, there is no program. There is no, this is a process and and it requires several tiers of change. And so we'll talk, I want to share a few examples, but also I don't want to cut you off, Adam. I think you were about to finish up.
No, and that's one of the most important things, Wendy. And so just so everybody knows, Wendy and I have this constant collaboration going on. And one of the things that Wendy has been doing is talking with organizations across the country around where they are infusing youth and what it looks like. So I'm super excited for this next section because Wendy, you're going to chip some of that off for us.
Yeah, and again, we're just teasing you here. So the first group I want to sort of talk about is how Youth Infusion is actually happening now. And the first example really focuses on how you create a shared culture. How, and in an organization, whether it's a local community nonprofit to a national org, how are things changing so that that culture really does embrace youth, not in a paternalistic or sort of patronizing way or controlling way or tokenistic way. And so this is a quote from an amazing statewide organization called Up for Learning. It's based in Vermont, and this is one of the teachers. And what is extraordinary about this group is they, like a lot of work that's being done around everything from school curriculum to the school to prison pipeline, this is an organization, Up for Learning, that operates outside the school system, but within it as well. Very interesting hybrid. And so one thing I want to read one quote I just love from one of the students who says, as a member, as a student rep on the local school board, I've never felt belittled, but at Up for Learning on the board of directors, I feel like a total equal to everyone else. And Galen goes on to say that on the various committees and working groups of this statewide nonprofit, that it's not just, you know, how often you'll have like a youth will co-facilitate with an adult, but you sort of know who's sort of doing most of the stuff, even though maybe we're camouflaging that. He says, no, it's not like that at all. It is so real. The walls of age apartheid are down. And then this is a teacher who is involved on the other side with Galen as one of his partners at Up for Learning, if you could go back. And the final line is, as a teacher, you know, if I had not had this chance, I would have missed so much. So that's one example of truly changing culture, which is so exciting. Then I'd like to just quickly give you, yeah.
Quick note that the slide says Youth and Adults Transforming Schools Together. That's the old name of Up for Learning. So you'll see the reference in both ways. That
is one of the programs of Up for Learning where they have it in local schools. Yeah. So the next one is looking at how attitudes change, because as we've alluded to, adults really are the ones that have to make the change, because many young people don't trust us. They're fed up with us. They're frustrated with us. We're not getting the job done. We're leaving them a mess. And 482 Forward, based in Detroit, is a county-wide organization which operates as a collective with many, many members, smaller groups who all work together on educational justice. And they have and this is on our website, a blog that I've written about this, but what is very exciting is it has a structure so the youth can still sort of be their own engine and sort of prioritize things, then work with adults on it, the adult members who are parents and community activists. And then together, what we have is this family network with a constant commitment to listening first to what the students themselves are saying and taking a backseat. There's some stories that I recommend you read about on our blog, because I don't want to take too much time now because time is running out. But that's a really exciting example of how adults are really changing their attitudes in a way that is bringing young people truly in as equal partners. And then the final example I'd like to share is really looks at changing the organizational structures. So you need all these tiers to happen for Youth Infusion to work. And this is a regional organization that's done mainly a lot of national work. It's called Youth Empowered Solutions. And I've known them from the beginning, and I visited their office. And it is so great because this staff is composed of majority part-time high school students, mainly from historically marginalized communities. So they are, because they are part-timers and they outnumber the adults, they actually are involved in the day-to-day. So when I was there, there is an atmosphere, there is an electricity unlike anywhere else I've experienced. And I think this is partly because there is generally a community dynamic that many adults, not so much teachers and like, yes, educators and so on, who are constantly engaging with young people, many adults really don't interact with young people. That brings us back to fear. That brings us back to all these ways we want to control young people. But it really is a magical thing. And this is not kumbaya. This is, there are really intentional strategies that can really change and transform our society.
You know, Wendy, and I think really what I'm hearing you say, you talked about those kind of three pillars. I describe these three pillars: the personal attitudes, the shared cultures, and
Yep.
the organizational structures as kind of being the way that we talk about youth infusion to understand it. But you know, the other thing that I figured out, Wendy, and you and I talked about this a little bit, that's also what upholds the structures that keep youth infusion from happening. And
Yep.
without going into it too far, I think it's important to just say adultism is a real thing. This bias towards adults that we all practice, whether we are adults or young people, this bias towards adult relies on personal attitudes, shared cultures, and organizational structures. And those three pillars hold up this idea of adulthood. Adults always know best. Adults always lead the pack. Adults always have to save everybody, especially those kids. But the problem is that, well, let me say this, you know, there are times when adultism has a place. There's a time when bias towards adults is probably really appropriate. I mean,
Yes.
frankly, if the building's burning down, Wendy, I'm not going to stop and build consensus with young people about the building burning down. Who should we save? What door should we go out? I'm just going to grab people by the scruff of their shirt and bring them out of the building. Whether or not they want to go is irrelevant. The problem, though, is that all adults always act like all buildings are always on fire, right? That we can always rationalize the shared culture being adultist, that we can always rationalize the personal attitudes being adultist, that we can always rationalize our organizational structures keeping young people from participating. What the awesome thing about this conversation, Wendy, is that it feels like we can flip that script, right? And bring it back to how can we support youth infusion? And it's those three pillars.
Yep. Yep.
Love that. I love that possibility. That's transformative. You know, it was a while back that there was a community organizer in California. Her name was Rachel Jackson. And Rachel was doing work on dismantling the school to prison pipeline and said of young people who were in juvenile incarceration, our youth are not failing the system. The system is failing our youth. Ironically, the very youth who are being treated the worst are the young people who are going to lead us out of this nightmare.
That's right.
The very young people who are being treated the worst are the young people who are going to lead us out of this nightmare. And that, to me, that's like reality. That's what it's all about. And that's why youth infusion matters so much, because for as much as adults give up on young people, and even the people who are here today, we're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you all are all on board with young people, with the power of youth. What we have to do is open up these doors and bring more people in. So we're going to round out this presentation, this short webinar, with this little piece on really what do we do? What are our next steps and what difference does it make? It comes down to 5 elements, 5 steps, as it were, to move forward. The first step is commitment. And we have to commit, either if you're senior level staff, if you have to commit your financial resources, you have to commit to ongoing training, you have to bring that board on board, you have to bring all of these different elements into serious commitment towards youth infusion. That's the very first step. The second step is preparation. You have to commit to learning, that initial learning, the ongoing and sustained learning. You have to commit to leadership and guidance from youth themselves to elevate Youth Infusion. You have to make that preparation in order to do it. You have to strategize. And this one is so important because we can't do this by coincidence. We can't keep bumping around in the dark and hoping that something's going to be different. That strategy includes intentional outreach to seek the involvement of those who are most directly impacted, who are often the most marginalized people and people of color. To bring them in on purpose. This isn't about Youth Infusion, isn't about creating more opportunities for young people who are already involved to become more involved. This is about creating new opportunities for young people who don't have them otherwise to experience the purpose, power, and belonging of Youth Infusion. So commit, prepare, strategize. Now check this out. Here comes reality. We're big on talking about DEI. We're big on talking about racial equity and justice now, but we have to have incentives. When we're bringing people of color, when we're bringing young people into organizations that are led by white people, that are led by well-meaning, well-accomplished, however you want to frame your work, we have to talk about incentives. Why should they? Unique incentives have to be creative, fostered, and otherwise built out to include and retain diverse young people in equitable partnerships. Finally, we have to reimagine. We have to recognize and practice the nuance and complex skills that will replace typical adultism reactions with unorthodox ideas, new insights, and all of that. So commit, prepare, incentivize,
Strategize.
Prepare, strategize, incentivize, reimagine. And these 5 steps really provide a door opening for Youth Infusion. So Wendy, what do you say? I mean, what's next? What do we do here?
Well, as I would love to put out the invite to, first of all, thank you everyone for inventing this 45 minutes in your ridiculous day. If you know of any organizations that seem to be experimenting with some version of how they really can engage with, not to and for, but with young people, again, sharing, taking turns at the wheel, please let us know. Drop us a line on our website, please. And I think the more pushback you can give us, we would so appreciate, because we know this is, we know most adults who work with young people are treated like camp counselors. I mean, they really are at the low bar of the status heap. And there is so much change that has to happen to elevate this whole concept that we really need to move away from age segregation to intergenerational interdependence and synergy. And out of that, there's no way it can't be better. It will be messy, but it could also be magical.
It is 1:45 on the Pacific coast of the United States. I want to thank everybody for coming today. Again, this video will be made available publicly. I suggest that everybody take a look back through the chat. We're going to share what we can. Megan, you asked a great question. Check out Colin's response, and we will get some of these questions and answer them. Again, go through our website, youthinfusion.org, to learn more. Thank you so much, Wendy. What a awesome conversation.
Thank you all so much.